Hello. I have an old friend who has a medical condition, and she confessed to me the other day how frightened she was that if she suddenly got a problem, she wouldn't be able to get an ambulance, and that would be the end of her. One of her problems is she lives on her own, so she doesn't have anyone to drive her to the hospital or get her there in any other way than by an ambulance. And of course this is a serious problem, and I don't live near enough to her to help out, so I'm stuck on that as well. The health service at the moment is in chaos. Well, a lot of people are frightened, and there's a lot of stuff about it in various newspapers about the strikes. There's an ambulance driver's strike or a nurse's strike or whatever, and hospitals are backing up, and they're talking about, stay home, wear masks or whatever, because the NHS is being overburdened by cases of flu. I just want to tell you about the health service, for which I have a great deal of respect and possibly even affection, by the way. So I'm not arguing against it, I'm just pointing out a couple of things. It was started in 1948. At the time, Britain was a highly conformist and parsimonious society. There'd been many years of war and post-war austerity, and people had got used to being very careful with all the resources that they used. And even more, the population was very stable. It might have even gone down a little bit in 1948. I mean, there was a baby boom, I suppose, around that time, but the population was stable and predictable, with low numbers of immigration. And there was a stratified society. There was a working class, a middle class, an aristocracy, and they all had expected norms of behaviour that most people conformed to most of the time. I'm not saying everybody was an angel and slotted into their social area, the social strata, that perfectly, but it was more or less predictable. And even the hospitals were run on semi-military lines of hierarchical authority, and people didn't talk back to the people who were higher up. And even so, at the time, I believe many of the nurses were from Ireland. There was a lot. It's like the health service has never actually fully supplied its own native-born nurses. There's always been some sort of an influx from somewhere outside. It was Ireland in the 50s, it was the Philippines, I think it still is the Philippines now. That sort of thing was going on. But the problem with so that meant there's always been a problem of staffing in the health service. As a matter of fact, that's probably why there were two levels of nurses. There's state enrolled nurses and state registered nurses. I think it's all changed now, but at the time they had to get state enrolled nurses who were not so well qualified, and they were the bedpan carriers and the floor washers, I suppose. Now, what's happened now is that there's a completely different social system. The population has ballooned out of all possible predictions from 1948. And there's also been an influx of people from many different cultures, and they are not predictable. And I'm going to give you an example of the difference, for instance, between European and Arab society. I'm not talking about marriage practices, I'm just talking about social interaction. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to tell you I'm Granniopteryx on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. I am also on Twitter, Gab and Parler, where I am at Granniopteryx, and I let you know when I've uploaded a new video on those platforms. All the links are in the description. Please help my channel by liking, by sharing, and by subscribing. If you're on YouTube, check that subscription. It might not be still going on, I've been told. You can also donate, buy me a coffee, or again, one of the links below, Subscribestar and PayPal, as well as buy me a coffee. Right, I'm just going to talk about a small difference between Arab and European societies. If you see an old lady in London, and if you, no, let's, London's a multicultural city, isn't it? If you see an old lady in Colchester carrying a bag that's too heavy for her, or having some sort of difficulty, you might go up and offer to help her. And she might say thank you very much, and or she might refuse you, but it would be politely. And you would feel, you know, pretty good about being useful. In an Arab society, if you went up to an old lady suffering the same difficulty, she would be very offended. She'd probably start shouting at you. There might even be a crowd around you. Because by offering to help, you are actually, in that society, telling her that she's incapable. It's a completely different attitude to social interaction there. And you can see it in the literature as well. If you look at fairy tales, for instance, European fairy tales, the good guy is always the one who helps the old lady carry the wood, or gives the old man the last of his bread, or something like that. Isn't that right? Any of the Grimm's fairy tales, you'll see that. The good son, the third son, who's got a bag, he's got a little bit of bread, and he gives it to a bird who turns out to be magic and grants him wishes, or some old man who begs for food and he says, I don't have much, but here you can have half of what I've got, that sort of thing. You know those stories. If you look at the 1001 Nights, which is the Arab, you know, the Arab version, the Levantine version of folk tales, you'll see that when somebody offers to help, the person that they offer to help takes advantage of them. There's the old man and the sea. He asked this guy, or some story where he asked this guy to give him a lift across a river, and when the chap has gone across the river, the old man won't let go. He's insisting on being carried all the time, and then the victim has to figure out ways to get rid of this burden. That is a very typical example of the difference between Arab and European cultures. But we now have a lot of Arab cultures in Europe. And this is causing us problems because we expect certain things that they don't, or that give us a surprise when we find out we're not getting the same sort of reciprocal treatment. There was talking about the health service. A couple of years ago, I made a video about a doctor who was sacked because he was looking at a patient. Actually, it was a woman who had a baby, and the baby was the patient, but he asked the woman to take off her veil so he could talk to her, because he couldn't talk without seeing her face. He couldn't assess what was going on. My suspicion is that the doctor wanted to see her face because he wanted to see if the woman was being mistreated. Now, he was sacked because this woman made a complaint against him for, you know, offending her religious sensibilities or something. Now, the health service was set up, as I said, in 1948, when doctors got well, you might say, a grovelling respect from patients who regarded them as being very worthy of respect. And now it seems that in many cases, patients are regarding doctors as a seedbed for suing the system. I'm not saying that 1950s medical attention was any better than it is now, by the way. As with any other organisation, there are good doctors, there are bad doctors, and there are murderously bad doctors, and that's always been the case. And I definitely believe in a National Health Service. But the idea that it'll live up to its ideals as it was set up in 1948 is just a pipe dream. It's impossible. I mean, one of the big things about the National Health Service when it was started up, it was somebody said, oh yeah, well, the health service is going to pay for itself because with a health service, people are going to become healthier. And so we're going to need to put less and less money into the service. Of course, that's a load of nonsense, but that's the trouble with theory, isn't it? What happened was we found more illnesses to treat, and that's just the way things are. And it's a big problem that needs sorting out, and it's not easy. It's not like saying, okay, give it more money. We could give it all the money in the world and it still would be falling apart because of the fractionalization or whatever of society itself. Money's always useful, of course, but we have to acknowledge the difficulties first of all. And I'm just going to take a little detour into this. So we've got this here. Instead of talking about ways of dealing with a refocused National Health Service, we've got Keir Starmer making announcements about pro-trans laws which are needed across the UK. No, we don't need pro-trans laws. We need a better health service. And you should be thinking of ways to do that instead of just saying, the Conservatives are making a mess of it. The Conservatives are threatening to privatise it. No, they're not. What they're trying to do is find solutions, but they're sticking plaster solutions. We have to have a national rethink about our society. When we know what our society is, then we can start working on how to deal with the problems of our society. And I'd say pro-trans laws are the very least of our problems. But of course, they are very much easier to deal with and to talk about than the mess that is our society now, because we're ignoring the basic problems of an unprecedented increase in population and a fractionalisation of different sorts of cultures, all trying to get what they can out of a system that was not built for them or with them in mind in any way. Okay, well, yep, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.